Hi Francis, it's Vince. Today I'm going to cover some printer settings for your Epson R2000 that we can manipulate to give you the best possible product with the new media you purchased. For those of you watching this video who do not own an Epson R2000, remember a lot of what I'm speaking about with these driver settings are applicable to your printer. The big thing here is that you may not have them listed in the same format and you may not have them all available. When I say all available, if you're using one of those budget-minded printers in that between $30 and $100 for an inkjet is really considered budget. Even $150 would still be on that budget end. You may not have some of these settings available. That does not mean you still cannot get excellent results. It just means you're not able to tweak the settings to really fine-tune and really master the art of tweaking them print heads to give you that real pop. So the big thing here is be realistic in what equipment you're using. Okay, if you're using, I've seen base model HPs, Epsons, Canons, in the sense of, $100, and they can produce an excellent print. The big thing here is that you're not going to be able to really dial in the ICC profile, the color profile, to give you that real high-end look of those $500 and $600 printers. So again, just keep that in mind as we go through. Now, one of the big things I'm going to say before I start this is if you do not have a setup tool that does actual printer calibration in the physical sense, I create ICC profiles for my equipment using a color monkey, which is basically a color spectrometer. You do a print. The tool actually then scans the print you've done to apply that to media. Okay, that is the best way to give you the most accurate color palette. Now, for those of you who are not delving into, true graphic production in that sense, then I've got another method that works just as well. It's a little more time consuming because, again, the tool you're paying for, it's not cheap. They run about $300 to $500. However, this method will yield excellent results if you have a little patience and are willing to sit there and put the time in. I guarantee you we can dial in your printer. So first and foremost, what we're going to do here is I'm just going to discuss some basic settings because I'm inside the R2000 Epson driver manual. The manual that comes with the printer basically discusses what driver ICM is, which is the printer driver, and then you got host ICM, which is in Windows the application, and then printer driver and printer driver. ICM is basically the settings that whether or not you're going to have software control your color settings or the printer driver. Okay, in this application, when you're using actual media, different media than is associated with the printer. If you're using an Epson type media like a photo glossy paper, you would naturally select the Epson glossy media, and the ICC profile for that media, which is basically just the color palette, will be loaded for that specific media, which is great. I mean, it makes things easy. It's a very generalized palette, but for most applications you'll be fine. However, if you really are getting into more graphic design, or you're doing, real custom jobs, or you really want certain things to pop, you can go as advanced or as mild as you'd like. You can use different graphic editing programs. We have Adobe, we have Corel. There's, once again, the market is vast. The big thing here is what I'm going to state is that I usually never have my printer driver do my actual colors, and the reason I don't is because some color palettes are brighter, some are darker, some aren't even matched appropriately, and it doesn't matter the brand of printer. I always like to have my graphic software do the application, actually hosting my color palette. So again, if you're doing it that way, you want to turn off the printer driver profile settings if you're doing a custom media and have your actual media colors manipulated by the software you're using for graphic editing. So if I'm using Adobe, I would naturally want that software to do my retouching, and then I would go back into the printer driver just to print. I do not use the printer driver's allocated default settings to do all of my color palette ratios. So once again, keep that in mind. Color sync, again, you've got it for Mac. If you have a Mac, I don't know if you're using a Mac computer, but you would just select that if it's for Mac. And again, all these settings are basic. It doesn't matter what printer you're using. You will find that these settings, whether it be you're allowing your printer driver to control your color palette, or you're allowing your graphic software to control your palette, those settings will be in there. So when it says host ICM, take that into consideration, that it's allowing the application to control your settings for your printer. Okay, so as we go through, I'm just going to peruse through because we do have a lot of different things covered. I'm trying to make this as smooth and as easy as possible. Okay. This is probably the most important page regardless of your printer. It's your printing preferences. Okay, and it'll be main. It's usually under a main layout. And again, select current settings, media type. This media type they have selected is an Epson Premium Glossy. Color, print quality, mode. What I like to do is when you're setting up for a new media, I always grab a sheet of paper. Okay, and why I grab a sheet of paper is if I don't have a tool like my Color Monkey that'll do the calibration in a systematic format for me, I create a systematic format so that we have settings recorded that we can always change and manipulate to give us a before and after so we can compare what looks the best. Okay, once again, this method works excellent. It's a little more time consuming, it's a little more tedious because again you're trying to get the best possible result, but it will yield excellent results if you invest the time and really focus on what you're doing. Another thing to take into consideration, if you change a lot of media, a lot of people don't realize that the more media you change, again, the more calibration is required to give you that real pop that you're looking for. I always try to find a media I really am happy with and stay with it, because it makes life a lot easier than going back and having to manipulate all the settings again to correlate for that another specific media. Now, there are certain instances, of course, you're going to have to do it. In that case, you bite the bullet, sit down, and do it again, and work from there. But overall, find a media you're happy with for that application, and once you dial this in, you'll find it's very simple to go back. If you keep good notes, and again, I'm old school. I like to have a piece of paper handy, at least on my first initial calibration. You're going to find this process is very, very simple. So let's say you've got your paper out ready, you're in your main printing preferences profile, and what we're going to do here is we're going to select, now in this printer driver I of course don't have your Epson R2000, but what you want to do is look for something similar to like a generic glossy paper or generic glossy settings. Okay, the film you're using is a very thin vinyl film if you're using the glossy media, and again, generic settings for glossy usually will suffice. Again, if you use a media type that's actually branded where it says like Epson Premium Glossy, your palette's going to be slightly different. Now, it does not mean you can't use it, it just means it's going to be slightly different. So the thing to take into consideration is let's start with a generic glossy setting, and you'll write that down. Okay, we're going to record that on the paper and we're going to set it up in the driver. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to print quality, and again, speed, once again, speed versus quality. Now guys, if you're using this and you're trying to produce a great image, speed is not important. Okay, when we're using a printer, it is a basic robot. I mean, it's a basic robot in the most general sense. You really have to dictate what you're looking for as versus quality or speed. In most applications, for most people, they're always going to take quality over speed, and honestly, you should, because realistically, with today's inkjets, again, and especially in the price range you're at, Francis, you want to really produce an image that's sharp and clear, more concise, especially if you're branding a product. I would definitely turn the printer quality down as far as speed. You want the speed to be low, and you want the quality to be as high as possible. It's going to make your colors more vivid. It's going to give you a lot higher pixel rating than just generalizing and going through. Now, that being said, even at the lowest quality, you're still going to have a really nice image. But for the connoisseurs who are doing this and really wanting to profit and use this in a more professional bound environment, I really recommend turning down the printer speed. Most people don't require that kind of speed. If you do, the best suggestion to do, and I can't emphasize this enough, is printing now has gotten cheap enough to where most of the time it's easier to buy another printer than it is to sit there and turn your speed all the way up and get just a marginally acceptable image. Okay, the slower the printer works, the higher the quality of the print. So just take that into consideration. Okay, now as far as mode J, you can see it says here no color adjustment, off. No color adjustment means, again, that we're turning the printer driver settings from automatic use, where the printer driver will automatically set up and do its own adjustment, to off. In that situation, whatever you set up as your graphics program, it will become then the priority graphic adjuster for color and adjustment. That's really what you're looking for. You want to have it to where your color and your software are matched based on which one you're using. If you're using the driver is going to go in and naturally adjust your color format for your profile. If you're using the software, which gives you a lot better adjustment, especially if you're doing retouching and refining, that's the best way to go. So you always want to, I always leave mine off. Again, that's my setting. Does not mean it's right for you. Once again, I do graphic design, so I leave it off and I actually go into my either Photoshop or Corel, and I manipulate and retouch any graphic image I'm going with, and then once that's complete, I will go in and I just let the driver do what its main purpose is, which is to give the instructions to the computer and or I should say receive the instructions from the computer and allow it to print that image. So once again, then you're down to your source, which is your sheet, and your size. You're going to, of course, put in the actual size. In most cases, it's a custom size, which is very easy to do. You'd hit the drop-down box. You would see it come up. Again, I can't do it on here because I do not have an Epson R2000, but you get the idea. You would actually click that. The drop-down box would appear. Custom would actually come out, and you would go in there and just adjust what setting you'd like for your printer. So in this instance, if you have a 12 by 12 inch, you would adjust 12 by 12. If you had 8.5 by 11, and so forth and so on. Borderless is a setting that, once again, it just means you're not going to have a border on the print. Most printers I've seen, it works better with it off. You can play with that setting and tweak it. Once again, with that note that we have here, that piece of paper, write down whatever settings you manipulate. Okay? You're going to write it down so that when we do a print, we can test that print and see if you're happy with it. If you're happy with it, then you know I've got my variable sheet written and I've got my driver settings written for this specific media, and you're set. Now, that being said, I have some people that will ask me, well, why would you do that when you can actually save the settings inside the actual driver? Well, that's a good question. But the thing is, as you go through there, and you actually do all that and you set up that media, the thing is, if you ever go to print with a different setting, unless you keep saving all the multiple different settings, you will not have something to refer back to as to what gave you the best result. When you actually have a sheet of paper handy and you actually have the physical copy of the sheet in front of you with that sheet of paper of the settings, you can compare the two and then go back and say, okay, this one looks better than this one. It's much easier, it's much more streamlined, and it'll still give you excellent results. So as we go through here, again, user defined, you can click on these settings, custom settings. Again, you're going to have this variable. That's why I'm not going into too much detail. There are a lot of different settings in here you can click on to manipulate. Each driver, again, is so different and vast. There's no way I can cover every single driver. However, for the most part, everything that's mandatory you're always going to find on the printer drivers. The manufacturers of printers are very intelligent in how they place all of the settings. What you find here with media settings and paper settings are the primary settings. So once you manipulate these, you're usually good to go, unless you want to get in there and really fine-tune what you're doing. But for general printing and, again, general graphic production, you don't have to get too crazy. The printers of today, especially this printer, it's an Epson R2000, you don't have to get too crazy as far as what you're manipulating to get great results. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to come over here, and you can see it says printer, preset standard, collated. This is just general settings for paper size. Really, you're not too concerned with this. Again, as you set different paper sizes, especially if you're setting a custom paper size, you're going to see that size actually show up on most drivers. Some drivers don't. Again, it usually shows up somewhere where you'll actually see, okay, I'm using 12 by 12 inch, I can validate it. As you come down here and it says basic advanced color settings, this is where you're getting into a lot of the more advanced settings. High speed mirror image, print quality, best photo. I always recommend to go with best photo or similar. Again, you want to always print as if it's printing more on a film. When you're dealing more with premium glossy type papers, it's closer to a film than an actual paper. So I always like to leave the settings at, as far as print quality, best photo, photo quality. They'll use different terms, but you always want to go with the highest quality you can go with. It's really going to make a difference as far as how the ink and the DPI is played out on the printer head to give you that image. So just take that into consideration without going into too much science. Rest assured that'll produce an image that you'll be happy with. Color settings, once again, off, no color adjustment. Again, the way they're showing you right here is letting your actual graphics software manipulate the image as far as the color palette, and then you'll go in to just use the printer driver to print that image. Gloss optimizer. Now this is a setting, again, that's really something that Epson uses. I've seen HPs, I've seen Canons. I really haven't seen that on them. It is something, it's supposed to make your images a little brighter on whatever media you're printing on. So again, you can turn it on, turn it off, it's up to you, but in this setting it's on. I would recommend leaving it on. It's certainly not going to hurt anything. Okay, as we come down here, these are just general settings. They're getting kind of blurry now. I'm going to see if I can zoom out a little bit. That didn't do much, so I'll zoom back in. Either way, this is just paper height, page setup. I'm not going to go into too much of this. Proof setup. Proof setup is actually a pretty cool setting. For those people who don't know what proof setup is, proof setup basically lets you do look and review the graphic image that's going to be produced in the color palette that you're working with. So it's kind of like that. That preview, the print preview, it's very similar to that. It's whenever you get done with manipulation of your graphic or image, you can go in, do the proof setup. Perceptual will give you what that proof is going to look like if you were to print it right now. That's the best way to go, so you have an idea of exactly what you're printing. So once again, I always like to go in and write down, proof setup I would use on every media I go with, because I like to see what I'm actually printing. It's just something to give you a backup as far as, especially if you're doing anything for professional use, I would always use that. This way, not all the time you're going to catch mistakes, but most of the time you'll catch mistakes, especially as you become more detail oriented. If you're doing graphics, you're going to learn to be very, very detail oriented, because a pixel in the wrong spot can cost you work. So keep that in mind. You're always wanting to go in, make sure your edges are clean and all that neat stuff. That's going to help you go through, and it'll let you compare different color palettes. So it's interesting. It's actually a good setting to have on, and you can definitely work around it. And again, you can always take it off if you want, but once again, make sure you're writing down every setting you manipulate. Okay, so now we're back in here, and it's just showing you again the cartridge option. Again, this is just to show your ink. Print preview, I always select that as on. Again, that does basically the same thing as proofing. This way you get to see what you're actually printing. But overall, you can see here where we're really at as far as the general settings. Once these settings are set, you can go in then and you've already written down all your settings that you're happy with. You're going to do a test print. Now again, I don't recommend doing a print if we're not certain of what results you're going to get. Don't waste an entire sheet. Do a small object and see what it comes out like. Okay, a colorful small object will usually yield the most advantageous when you're trying to really dictate of how the media is responding to the settings you've loaded. Once you get that small image, what I recommend is you never want to change the image that you've printed. Okay, and what I mean to say is, if you're printing a colorful globe, let's say, or the earth, or something where it's got a lot of vibrant colors, you want to use that image over and over again to compare to if you're doing testing, because then you'll always know what looks different. If you're doing a gorilla one time and then you're printing a banana another, that's really a really vast difference to give you any type of continuity. So common sense yields, the highest result when it comes to going over and staying with continuity to give you the best possible result. If you do a globe or a marble, those are really cool images to do as tests. Print out the marble, see what it looks like. Print out the marble again with a different range of settings on these settings and see what it looks like. And then you can go back and say, I like it this way better, I like it that way. Maybe my reds are a little darker. I can go in and manipulate the colors either manually or with the software to give me the best result, and then you can go from there. That's the easiest way to do this, and you're not using a bunch of media. You can do images as small as 2 inches, 3 inches, and it'll give you that color palette. The more colors, the better, to give you that range that you want to look for, and you can go in there then and make your adjustments and write down your adjustments, and again, you'll have that printed sheet or printed multiple sheets, small pieces, to go through and actually look at and say, okay, this looks the best, that looks the best, this looks the best. The one thing to keep in mind, and I can't emphasize this enough, is take your time when you're doing this, because if you're really trying to get it right, so to speak, you're trying to make it look as professional as possible and really yield those really nice eye-popping graphics you're looking for. Take your time, separate each sheet, Look at each sheet in different light. You may want to go outside. If your main products are outside, you want to go outside and verify, the colors in that light. If you're doing it inside, you're looking at hard, soft lights. Whatever product you're yielding, if you're doing just general reproduction, then a softer light is fine. Even just if you're doing most of your prints are going to be indoors, I would always view it under that. Okay. Once again, if you do have access to a calibration tool, that's probably going to be your best friend, because the calibration tools of today actually take the light source around them and calibrate to that light source. So again, I'm talking for the person who doesn't have, another $500 to invest in that. The method I'm talking about works flawlessly if you're willing to commit the time to it. The big thing again is just be realistic on the printer you're using. In this case, an Epson R2000 is one of the top brands in an inkjet line. So you're not going to be unhappy virtually any way you go. The big thing I think you're going to end up doing is just tweaking your color palettes as far as what colors are brighter and what colors aren't. Other than that, the images will be clear as day. If you're using a $20 or $30 HP, then again, most of these settings will still be there. You'll probably still have all of the settings on this page. You just won't have all of the finer advanced settings that we're really looking for when we start doing photo type reproduction. So that's the big thing too. If you guys are using a really high-end photo type printer, your images are going to be really up there, because again, the DPI is up there. If you're using just general reproduction inkjets, not that the DPI isn't going to be high, it's just you just have to keep that into consideration. The print heads are totally different. So once you understand that, you still can get some amazing results. I've seen $50 printers that perform like a $200 printer in certain applications, especially if you're doing dark text, if you're doing darker colors, and you're not really looking at brightness and stuff like that, then you're fine. So just keep that in mind as you go through and you play with everything. And like I said, when you're doing an actual physical comparison as you print out, let's say a marble, and you've got one marble here at 3 inches, and you print another one excuse me, at 3 inches with different settings. You'd have your one list of settings on one side, one list of settings on the other, and you can visually go out in the light that you've printed it in and check it out and see which one actually looks the best. And odds are you can even get a couple people's opinion. I usually do that, and usually you'll find it looks pretty much the same overall. It's just the color brightness of the palette you're going to want to manipulate. So keep that in mind. The other thing I want to talk about is cutters. Okay, right now I'm inside your printer driver. That basically covers what settings you'd want to go through with the printer driver. Again, whatever you go with, I would always go with the media type. Just to reiterate, always go with a generic glossy paper or other glossy paper or other glossy film, preferably a film setting if they have that. Epson, I think, may even have vinyl. Some printers actually have a vinyl setting. If they do, you want to go for the glossiest setting you can go with. If they don't, always look at more or less what they have available. If they have a glossy paper available, it's typically going to be very similar to this film. So it's something, once again, you can manipulate and just play with to give you that optimal setting. But now that we get done with the printer settings, I really want to start covering with you real quick just the Cameo, because again, the Cameo setting is, because I know that's what actual cutter you're using. I'm just going to pull up their site. Just give me 1 second. So that's a Cameo cutter. Okay, just to discuss different cutters. For those of you who are using a Cameo or something similar to the crafting type machines, these work excellent, to get the job done. The big thing you're going to have to do with any vinyl or film is take into consideration the settings for the thickness of the film so you get the proper cut. Okay, you always want to, once again, and I would definitely go in and manipulate your drivers. Again, there's a lot of different things here. Again, you'll be working with an adhesive vinyl. And again, this, I guess, is just you going through, and you're going to update your country to actually go through. Oh, this is for shopping, excuse me. Learning. Again, let's see. Print and cut. Sorry about that. Yeah, you just want to come in here, and again, most of the entire process is nothing more than you adjusting your cut pressure. Again, I always try to use the smallest piece of media possible to adjust the cut pressure. The big thing is, I like to actually start ahead and work backwards. If you already have familiarity with cutting vinyl, I like to start somewhere, I should say, at that level that I've used on my last piece of vinyl, if it's a new media. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, I usually don't have to adjust too much ahead of that mark to actually go somewhere. So once again, you want to take out a sheet of paper or use that same sheet. That's fine. If you're going to be using the same setup with the printer, I recommend using the same sheet you kept and recorded your printer settings on. And once you do that, you then can go in and write down the settings of your Cameo. And again, it's going to record all the settings, but if you save those sheets, you're going to have everything you need for that printer calibration set, and you're going to have the setup for your actual cutter. So it works kind of hand in hand. Big thing I would do is, again, I would start at a higher setting or the setting you've used on your last type of adhesive back vinyl and work from there going up or down. Usually it's going to be very close. The film is 3.5 thousandths in thickness. You're talking a very, very thin film. You really don't need a lot of pressure. But that's a good variance there, and that's really all you're going to need to do. If you're using a print and cut, I use Graphtec cutters. So again, my cut is pretty much, my arms is automatic. I don't know how, most of these cutters are not automatic, so you'll have to go in and actually calibrate the registration marks, at least as far as I know. But again, cutters vary in make and model just like printers do. The big thing to do is just, you want to use the minimal amount of media required to give you a test cut till you're getting a really, really sharp edge. All of your edges should be sharp. It should lift with, a very clean lift. You will find that this media does have a very strong adhesive backing. It sticks very well to even the liner. You're going to find that there's slight resistance lifting it because, again, that adhesive is very strong. But when you lift it, you should not have any edging. You should not have any tails. Everything should be totally clean, and usually you'll see it. You'll see an indent in the media which reflects that the media was cut properly. It should be a pretty sharp indent. To go into complete detail with that, I'm going to probably do another video as far as what the cuts should look like. This video, once again, was more for printer settings, but as far as the cutting, it's certainly not rocket science. Once you determine what size media you want to cut as far as a test, I would recommend, like my Graphtecs, I can use, basically I go with like a 5-inch piece of media, but a 5-inch piece of media on my Graphtec means I can test that media over and over again for maybe 30 times to get that cut if I required to. Most times I don't. If I required to, I could get them 30 cuts out of that 5-inch piece of media. In your case, you may need more or less. So just keep that in mind. You never want to use more material than you have to, and that's the best way to go with that. But overall, I think now you have a pretty good understanding of where you're going and what you need to do. Again, with the type of printer, Francis, you're using, you're going to get really great results. I love those type of printers. The Epsons are amazing. I myself have a couple Canons, and they're amazing as well. The big thing here is just be realistic on your end result. If you're using higher end equipment, you're going to get a higher end result. If you're using lower end equipment, it's not that you're not going to get great results, but especially from 10 years ago, the lower end equipment of today still far exceed what was available 10 years ago. The big thing here is just be realistic and take your time. Doing this is not a science. It's more of trial and error to get it just dialed in perfectly. Cutters are more, I think, are actually easier to work with than printers, especially if you're trying to get them certain colors to pop and this, that, and the other thing. The big thing here is how picky you are and what you're actually looking to do. And again, that's why I said don't be afraid to have more eyes present. If you do a test print and this graphic you did this way and then these settings you manipulated, have someone else look at it with you and again give you a good idea, objective opinion of what it looks like, and you're going to find you will get amazing results. That's the big thing. So if you have any more questions, Francis, message me. Anyone else who's watching this video, please don't be afraid to ask. I'll do my best to work with you. Once again, the market is so vast. To do videos on every specific project would be too difficult to do, but hopefully this has been more informative and gives you guys a little more outlook as far as what you're doing. So take care. Thank you.